about them Cowboys? Yeehaw! Because for the Dallas Cowboys, following another early playoff exit to the San Francisco 49ers in 2022, so that's back-to-back early playoff exits to them, the Cowboys were hoping that 2023 was finally going to be their year. They finally make it past the divisional, finally make it past the wild card, and finally get to the elusive NFC Championship game that they haven't been to in nearly 30 years. For them, though, they had to make some moves to spice things up. And they did. They made some big trades in the form of some AFC South names in corner Stephon Gilmore from the Indianapolis Colts and receiver Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans. And they made a few moves in the NFL draft to replenish other key areas to bolster their team. But as I mentioned in my preview for this team for 2023, would they be able to trust Dak Prescott in the biggest of games when the spotlight shined brightest on him? Because in the last 2 years in the playoffs against the 49ers, or any team for that matter, that he was just not been trustable. He shrinks when the lights are brightest on him. So would they be able to get the very good Dak Prescott that they need in clutch time? That remains to be seen going into another year. So when you look at the positives for this team, that is the Dallas Cowboys, you got another very good year out of Dak Prescott. He started off a little slow the first few games, but after the bye week, Prescott started really heating up. He started playing like an MVP, torching opposing defenses in the air, throwing at least 2 touchdowns most games the rest of the way. His best game, in my opinion, came against the Philadelphia Eagles in that rematch in Week 14. He really torched their butts at a point where the Eagles started to have their struggles, and he needed to prove that if we want this division, then we have to play it a lot better than we did in Philadelphia in Week 7. So Week 8, correction. So that's exactly what Dak Prescott did. Played a lot better than he did in Philadelphia and took it to the Eagles in that Week 14 rematch. So played better the rest of the way, for the most part at least. And another key reason for Dallas's success in 2023 was their defense. A major key to their success. Defensive coordinator Dan Quinn and his squad was one of the best in the league in pressuring, sacking, and forcing turnovers out of opposing quarterbacks. Now, in fairness, though, the secondary did struggle a bit after losing corner Trayvon Diggs to an ACL injury early on, but second-year player Deron Bland stepped in greatly. He was a turnover generator. He got a pick six in practically nearly every single game that he played and set various records for interceptions. I think in that Thanksgiving game against Washington, he set the record for most interceptions by a player. Most pick sixes by a player. So that's something for his fans and himself to be proud of. And then, of course, another positive for this team was getting the NFC East once again. For the second time in 3 years, the Cowboys won the division. And this was despite a mixed December of road struggles against the Bills and the Dolphins, and they still had their home highs. The Cowboys managed to grab full control of the division thanks of them doing their part, winning these games, and overseeing the Eagles collapsing. Now, last year, when the Cowboys had a chance to win the division, they got embarrassed by the Washington Commanders in D.C. But this time around, they avenged that, and they took care of business. They sealed up the division and got the number 2 seed in the NFC. Unfortunately, though, all that goodwill went to waste, because what's that saying again? That a lot of people like to say about the Dallas Cowboys. Oh yeah, what can go wrong will go wrong. That reared its ugly head again for the Cowboys in the playoffs, because Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers laid an ass whooping from the very start in that wild card game on Dallas. In Dallas, it was the wild card game massacre by the Green Bay Packers in Arlington, because when halftime reached in that game, it was 27-7 by that point. And it only got worse for the Dallas Cowboys in the second half. By the time we got to early in the fourth quarter, 48-16. Big yikes. And when you get to the early part of the fourth, like later on after that, they were already pulling their starters for Green Bay was. And it took a couple of scores to get them back in, but still, this was embarrassing. This was probably the worst loss the Cowboys took in any point of their history. You had various cameras catching how embarrassed Jerry Jones was watching that game in his own stadium. And it's just basically that the Cowboys did that was successful all season. It was neutralized in one game. It's just basically a summary of why they failed so much. They fail so much in the playoffs. And I guess you can also see, like, I don't know. I guess you could say that it was coming. You foresaw this coming because all those the regular season losses that they had, the 5 losses that they had, it was warning signs. If you caught their losses, they were warning signs of what was to come in their wild card loss to the Packers, because there's signs. There are signs of this. Dak Prescott turning the ball over more, being very careless. Now notice all these losses were on the road, and like I said, Prescott turned the ball over, struggling to get his passes in, and then the defense was a much different defense that played on the road than they were at home. They were not the unstoppable defense that they were at AT&T Stadium. So the Packers exploited that in a place where Dallas had been dominant all season. Home. Like, the Cowboys were playing like they were the team on the road. So that's alarming. So sure, Dallas may have had another successful regular season, but it was the same result for the third straight year with the worst outcome of them all. The wild card massacre by the Green Bay Packers. Now, and once the season ended, I was like, I'm very surprised that Jerry Jones didn't fire Mike McCarthy after that shit show. It took him like a while too to come to that decision. It's like, no, I'm going to keep Mike McCarthy. I'm basically going to make the same mistake that Dean Spanos made with Brandon Staley. I'm going to keep them on for one season, and then when they screw up again next season, I'm going to fire them. Like, you lost 48 to 20 something. Like, you don't think you should fire them after that embarrassment? It's like, and this is 3 straight seasons where the Cowboys haven't gone anywhere beyond the divisional, beyond the wild card. Like, don't you think it's time for a change? Don't you? I'm just saying. But nonetheless, Mike McCarthy, going into this season, this coming fall, he has one more chance. He has one more chance to prove himself as a head coach of this team, and he needs to have his squad regroup this coming fall. And unfortunately, when you look at this offseason so far for the Cowboys, it's not exactly the most inspiring. I mean, it's still early though. They still have some time to make some moves. But when you have minus $4 million in the red, not really much you can do. They do have the 24th pick in the draft, so I imagine they use it on something like whatever's best available for them. Looking at some of the key free agents, they pretty much lost them all to other teams, like tackle Tyron Smith, a key part of their offensive line, to the New York Jets. Running back Tony Pollard going to the Tennessee Titans, so a big need for the Cowboys right there. They lost their edge rushers, Doris Armstrong and Dante Fowler, to the Washington Commanders. And linebacker Lane Vander Esch, forced to retire to a career-ending neck injury back in Week 5. So, looking at some of the moves that they already made, they had to replace Dan Quinn for Mike Zimmer, former Vikings head coach, as defensive coordinator. Remember, Dan Quinn went to go on to become the head coach of the Washington Commanders back in January. And then they didn't make too many moves because, like I said, no money. So they re-signed Rico Dahl, the kind of breakout-ish backup running back, to a 1-year deal. And they signed Chargers linebacker Eric Kendricks to a 1-year deal. So still plenty to address for the Cowboys this offseason, such as drafting another linebacker to either pair or add behind Eric Kendricks. So the middle of the field for the Dallas Cowboys was a serious issue for them, and it became larger when they lost Van Der Esch in Week 5. So they need to use either their first or second pick in the draft on a linebacker, because relying on Eric Kendricks is not going to be enough. Meanwhile, on the offensive side of the ball, Dallas's biggest strength, which is the offensive line, it could become a weakness for the first time in quite some time if it doesn't address the loss of Tyron Smith properly. Because when you look at the offensive line going to 2024, there's still some things that they need to settle. Because Tyler Smith is going to move to left tackle, or at least I was aware of it. Guard Zach Martin, he has his spot held down already, but you got to figure out the other 3 spots. What are you going to do there? Who are you going to sign? Who are you going to draft? So you got to retool that offensive line some. So for the Dallas Cowboys, obviously it was the same as the last 2 years. Another good year of regular season success, yet is the same disappointing finish. So it's basically has been a 3-year-long rerun for Dallas since 2021. Good regular season, bad end with a one or done or a 2 and done playoff appearance. So they still haven't made the NFC Championship Game in nearly 30 years. So for terms of this season, Dak Prescott looked good for much of the season until you realize that when you put the bright lights on him, you can't trust him, just as I imagined. So until Jerry Jones can actually make improvements for the Dallas Cowboys, then that can help them reach the NFC Championship Game finally, let alone a Super Bowl, then they're just going to always be that team living their status quo of always starting strong, but finishing flat when it matters most. And until they realize that, they're not going anywhere in 2024 and maybe even beyond.